Welcome again to All Things Conflict with me, your host, Maria Arpa. And today in our series, talking about conflict in leadership positions, my guest is John Cullum. John has a very long history in senior management, in chairmanship, in non-executive directors, all sides of the board table, from his initial career in finance at Ford to serving as a trustee and chair in many small charities. I'm sure you're going to enjoy his eldership and wisdom. Let's dive in. John, how lovely to talk to you. So we didn't meet that long ago, but I thought we had a really lovely chat about your time in business. And actually, I think we started to talk about the loss of eldership in business. And this series is all about, directors, CEOs, leadership teams, entrepreneurs, founders, all that sort of thing, because, we can talk about conflict in the workplace, but if the leadership aren't aligned or they're having their own conflicts, it will have an impact all the way through. It'll have ripple effects all the way out. So I wondered if we could begin with you, telling me a little bit about your vast experience.
Yes, nice to see you again, Maria. I've been very lucky, really, in my career. I haven't had that many companies, but they've all been very interesting. I came out of university straight into Ford Motor Company, hoping to become a child psychiatrist. I ended up a finance director at Ford Motor Company. So you can work that one out for yourself. How that happened, I still don't know. But anyway, it was a great training ground for Ford. And I eventually, working some time in Detroit as well, I eventually became finance director of Ford Credit's European operations. I then joined another multinational company called PHH Corporation. Were then headquartered in Baltimore. Came across as finance director and then became CEO and chair ultimately of their European operations. Before I then was responsible for selling it and working myself out of a job, actually. So I was quite happy because I then moved into the world of non-exec directorships and had at 1.5 five different companies that I either chaired or was a board director of. That's alongside, and those range from PR companies where I'm still the chair, non-exec chair, to property management, where again I'm still a chair, and that's based in Australia, and smaller companies, the water cooler companies. And then in the charitable world, I've chaired music festivals. I'm currently a trustee of a few other charities where I'm involved. So fairly rich, and very very lucky to have had the jobs and roles I performed in.
It's such a diverse sort of portfolio, isn't it? From non-profit through to profit, executive, non-executive, chairmanship. So I would imagine that you've seen it all. And I imagine you've got many a story for us. But I guess one of the differences between success and failure is our ability to navigate conflict. And I wonder if you could speak to that for me.
Gosh, well, yes, for all the different businesses, it's all about people. Even charity is a very competitive business. The difference with charities is you can't say there are bad businesses. I worked at a time when Ford Motor Company produced an awful car. It was just a bad product. in charities, it's very hard to say this is a bad charity. Nobody can say that the Sick Donkeys charity is better than the cancer relief. You cannot make those judgments. But it's very competitive because you are competing for people's philanthropy, for their donations, for their time. And of course, in business, you're competing for the customer, competing for finance, for shareholders. And in corporate business, in large multinationals, in small SMEs, in charities, conflict is at the heart of it. I would say, in general, the conflicts I've handled have been largely what I call healthy. It's been healthy debate, but there have also been pretty heated, angry exchanges that have been counterproductive and very difficult, and they've required different sort of resolutions or actions taken. And that has been, when I look back on my degree, they ended up a joint with economics and psychology. In the early years, I used economics heavily because I was very dependent on the financial technicalities, if you like, of the finance world. But later in life, as you come to take on executive roles in terms of CEOs or chairmanships, you're handling resolution, you're handling people, and all businesses. I say all businesses in this day and age of AI and bots. I'm not too sure if we're handling people, but fundamentally we are handling people. And it's those human resources, what we call emotional capital, all sorts of fancy words attributed to it, but that ability to handle and work with people and conflict resolution is going to be so important for major companies to attract and retain good people.
So when I hear you say, conflict resolution is important, are you talking about the way in which leadership, manage that kind of thing? And what would you say are the worst possible traits, and what would you say are kind of healthy traits? I've heard you talk about boardroom disputes and some that are pretty painful, and things that have been, successful, where you've gone through the constriction, if you like, but only to come out better off.
Yes, I think if I look back, let me give you a few, maybe some examples,
Yes, that would be wonderful. Thank you.
which I think I've found useful, and we all learn. By the way, we all learn through experience. There's no silver bullet. We all make mistakes. I certainly did. But leadership, I think you learn over the years. You learn to listen. You learn to accept that executive management is and directorship, CEOs, is very much a privilege. You're privileged to actually be acting on behalf of the shareholder. Equally for the employees, it's important you give them both their say if you're going to produce a successful company. Now, some would argue that autocratic direct management is what we need. Dare I say, the Trump style of management is gets things done. That was the style. But I'm still a great believer that in the long run, the best run companies, both to work for and ultimately to achieve, are those that engage better with their employees and listen more. Again, I think with resolution, when I look back, I think a lot of the problems people don't listen enough. They're so conditioned in their own world. They're ready. They can't wait to get their own viewpoint across, as passionate as it may be, but we don't give enough time to listen to the alternative viewpoints that just might have a better answer. So over the years, I know in one particular business, we were having some real challenges among the directors. We had to cut back the budget. We had a certain amount of restricted investment funds, and we thought, well, which strategies are we going to adopt? And there was quite heated exchange and quite heated conflict on this. So every director then got every director to write down the pros and cons of every strategy, forcing them to recognize there were certain pros in this other person's viewpoint. And what we agreed the democratic decision would be the strategy that got the most pros, we would give the first toss of the dice to. And at least people accepted that was a democratic decision, but based on some fundamental good business practice. We all recognized these were pros. We found the common ground, if you like. That was one example. Another example, I think, where I think we recognise that and this was to do with leadership styles, and that was the 360-degree feedback we engaged in. There was a lot, particularly in the motor industry. I call a lot of A profile, hard driving, generally men. When I first joined that particular board, I think we had 7 men and 1 woman who was the HR director. She was anyone that actually could have been an HR director. I think the men were far too hard driving, not good people, but absolutely driven and very much wanted their ways. So we did a 360-degree feedback, and it was quite sobering for everyone to learn just exactly how they were perceived. We have this positioning of ourselves. We think we're perceived a certain way. Actually, to have it come back to you. And it was anonymous, by the way, the feedback. Oh, 3 people think you're arrogant. 3 people think you talk too much. 3, whatever. It was very, very sobering. And certainly for some time afterwards, it improved quite significantly. And I noted myself, everyone got their personal feedback, how they were responding and listening more. And shall we say, yes, there were conflicts, but they were better handled. And I think we learned a lot from it.
That's really interesting, isn't it? So if I understand you, 360-degree feedback is one way of doing it.
Yep.
But at the heart of what I think you're presenting to us is for us to be able to listen more. We need to listen to each other, because when we don't listen, and we live in a society where most people feel unheard, I talk about conflict as actually only having 3 core messages. The first one is you change to suit me. No, you change to suit me. No, you change to suit me. And we're competing. And then the other one is, I'm worse off than you. No, I'm worse off than you. No, I'm worse off than you. And we're on a downward spiral for an empty bucket of empathy.
Yes.
But actually, the truth is the only conflict message, as far as I can tell in the 30 years I've been doing this work, is I need to know I matter. Yes. And the only way I can see that I matter is if you listen to me.
Yes, absolutely right. I think I particularly learned when I first stepped into the non-executive world, that's when I realized the importance of having 2 ears and 1 mouth. And to resist saying, well, I wouldn't do that, but start saying, have you thought about maybe this might be a helpful way? So you condition your language, but with the ears, it's not just listening hard, it's really listening and understanding, because you can play at listening, but not really get it, or you have such conditioned habit that you tend to trot out the same stuff. So you're listening through a screen, not really open-minded. The best listening is truly open-minded and almost as though you've never met the people before. One other thing that I have found very useful over the years in terms of helping resolution and coming to consensus is actually, where you can, to go off-site for meetings. When you have them it becomes too territorial. If you're in your office, people have got their charts up on the wall, even their family picture. It's their fiefdom. You go off-site, you're physically and literally and figuratively in an open new space, new open, non-conditioned thinking, open-mindedness. It can bring all those benefits to go off-site and not within the conditioning of that and the territorial conditioning of your usual office surroundings. So that I've found has been very helpful. These away days, which the average employee saw as a because there was normally a game of golf attached to it or something. But again, that was good because you got out and you chatted. I came to be a great believer of mixing the two, the serious stuff with a little bit of pleasure, if that's the right word, although to me golf was a pain, but it was pleasurable to be out there and talk more freely without the heaviness of that office environment around you.
Yeah, there's something about positions and egos and needing to be right and competing with each other.
Yeah.
And some of those things, some of those kinds of hard, difficult discussions are really important to move things forward. But I think if I really understand what you're saying, it's that we also, we are going to have difficult conversations and things are going to go wrong. And, anything to do with people is messy. But how do we have those? How do we strategize whilst looking after each other at the same time, whilst recognizing our common humanity?
Yes. Well, at one extreme, and again, sometimes we have to use the famous expression tough love. And over the years, again, I've had to let a couple of people go, not just straight redundancy because we couldn't afford them, but actually it was they were just not team players. It was creating
Mm,
disharmony. We were never going to get that harmony.
mm,
And equally, it was for their own welfare. This particular individual, he was so wound up. He was not a good team player. I just didn't think the environment would have helped him. And we had a long chat about him. I respected him. He was an individual with his own right, but he was never going to be a team player, and he was causing disharmony. We were never going to get over that conflict, and I thought it was hurting him. He would probably have been an early casualty for a heart attack the
mm.
way he was heading. So that was the tough love approach. Otherwise, I think the best we can do is just to arrange that position where we always respect the person. Ultimately, the CEO is paid to take that final decision, but it's pretty much a failure when you've got to take the final decision with no agreement. You'll never get 100%, or very rarely, if you're lucky, but at least you'll get an understanding. And that's the worst thing. It's rather like a child telling a parent, well, why do I have to do that? Because I said so. That's the worst thing you can say. The second worst thing is trust me. And says to me, trust me, that easily puts me on edge. And I think the more we can, going back to our earlier point, listen constructively, respect the individual's viewpoint and learn from it, go in open-mindedly as possible. Then ultimately we are business people, or we have in the charitable world, we've got, time and funds are against us. We have to take the best decision we can for the organization. And that's the key thing. We are paid or working for organization, and good governance says that's your responsibility. That's capitalism. You are working on behalf of the shareholder. You can respect the employee, but you're not working for the employee, you're working for the shareholder. You're doing that with employees you want to carry with you and get them engaged.
Yes, that's really interesting because to take that step further, sometimes it's important that someone makes a decision for good or for better or worse. But one of my big sort of angsts, if you like, is just at the point where we've got everything on the table, we take a vote and we don't go deeper into the conversation and really understand where we're coming from and find, as you called it, the common ground, and what I call is our shared reality.
Yeah.
It's such a shame to do that. For me, voting and going with the tyranny of majority rule is an obstacle to the greater connection and the sort of making something that's bigger than the sum of the parts.
Yes. But there, of course, quite often you're balancing time pressures. I always find that I've learnt over the years not to have massive agendas for a board meetings. 14 items never works. And equally, it became a lot of board meetings that I used to run. I was guilty as anyone else, became almost extensions of what really were executive management meetings, not board meetings, where you should focus much more on big conflict issues or big strategic issues that should be much more strategic, but they became very much executive issues. And when you've got 40 in it and you're trying to get through it in an hour or 2 hours, you had to get the quickest route. Well, let's have a quick vote. As you rightly say, you couldn't really brain it through. Much better to put 3 or 4 topics, give them a really good airing, so you felt you've given it justice, and whatever decisions you take are better understood and bought into, if that's the right word, by those who had to now carry it out.
Yeah, so I would say, I agree totally. It's 14 items on an agenda in an hour and a half. It's just, it's never going to work. You're just going to be completely firefighting and just trying to get through stuff instead of understanding. I think you use the word privilege, the privilege and the joy of the tasks. So I always think that the board meeting itself is just the place where all those other discussions and connections and ability to participate and making community show itself in those agenda items that you then can sort of focus on, because the trust and the goodwill has been built. So how do you respond to that?
Yes, and it comes back to first the nature and the constituents of a board meeting. Again, I go back to my days in the motor industry when it was very, very male dominated. And you think about it, 50% of the drivers are women and 50% are men. And the manufacturer were producing these macho male cars, and not listening to the fact that actually there's some women that wanted a bit of a smaller car, or maybe room for, I don't know, the children, the yoga match, whatever it was. They listened much later than they should have done. Nowadays, I'm happy to say they're much more balanced. So you're getting balanced viewpoints, and that's what you want in a board meeting. You don't want, whether it's 6, 8, whatever it is. Again, I think boards are, I think 8 is the maximum you want on the board. Ideally, I like 5 or 6 at most, but I like different viewpoints, either running different strands of the business, so everyone's represented, but equally every aspect, whether that's a people aspect or particularly a salesy or a marketing or a finance lead, the usual, if you like, skill sets that promote good governance and whatever. So I think to a board, it's how it's made up, the people that constitute it, and the areas in which the skill sets cover are going to make for much better board meetings and much better outcomes for the organisations that they serve.
Yeah, I can really see that. So let's talk a bit about like what you're doing now, So where are you serving now? Because you seem, as I listen to you, and you use lovely words like privilege, I get your sense that you're a person that likes to be of service. And do you think that's something we're losing, people of being of service?
Maybe we are. As I say, I was brought up in the, if you like, the hard driving. Well, I was in Detroit when it was called Motown, quite right. It really was. It was a very hard driving. People thought it was fun. In some respects, it was, but it was pretty hard and macho and lacked a lot of empathy with its people. It was pile them high and sell them as quickly as you can. And I think over the years, I think companies are much more, the social impact of their as I'm happy to say, is coming through much more. I go back to the point of privilege. Yes, it is a privilege. Once you get to executive level, you're generally well paid. You earn well. You have the security of a good pension, and that's so important. And then it's a privilege to be able to lead organisations where you can take some very key decisions. Just the ability to. I remember when we had the ability to give out funds to. I never forget. Obviously, I love arts and culture, and music in particular. And when I was in the motor industry, I had the guy from Bath Festivals come to me and said, "Would we sponsor the classical music concert?" And I looked at him very hard. And I sort of laughed. I said, "You realise I run an organisation in the motor industry, and they'd much rather watch, hard wrestling or whatever it was." Um, and then I thought about it, and I said, "Was it being held in Bath, a beautiful city?" And we brought our key clients down. We sponsored 2 or 3 concerts, and they absolutely loved it because it was something very different to them. And we weren't pigeonholing them into, oh, you like football or you like wrestling, whatever it is. This was something that opened people's minds. And it was a privilege to be able to take that decision as a CEO. So there are all sorts of privileges attached to it that we mustn't take for granted. And it was equally, it gives you the ability not to typecast either clients or employees. In those days, the degree was everything. But in my later years, I currently chair a non-exec chair of a company where the CEO, I don't think he has 3 O levels to his name. He just was not academic, but it's one of the sharpest, brightest, innovative minds I've ever met. You should not. In the old days, we looked at the length of the qualifications on their CV, and we're very lucky if they hadn't, ticked half a dozen boxes. They were very lucky to get an interview. Now I think it's almost the reverse. We almost look at that as the fact, oh yes, they happen to have a degree in this. But you interview them and you see they've got listening skills, they've got passion, they've got something about them is going to be good for your company. You learn that over the years, very much so. But I am not. I'm quite optimistic about the future in that sense. I've watched my children and grandchildren nowadays. I grew up in the age of racism and elitism, and I think we've so much smoothed that. There's conflict, but it's handled with much more, generally, I think, empathy and skills on all sides. And business people do volunteer a lot. I've seen it a lot in the charities I work with. And it's so important for charities. They need those business skills to come on board, because as wonderful as the people are, they're not used to balance sheets. The law can be a real challenge to them. So they need to do the things they're good at, what other people can advise to keep them keep them financially solvent.
It's such a joy to hear you speak about that you think things are getting better in as much as people are more empathic, that we're talking about these terrible things like racism and inequalities and discrimination, that we're listening to each other more, that you're watching people come through with passion. Because so many times I speak to people and the prognosis is really bad. So there must be something in you. And how did you get here? How did you get to this point of being able to see, to see a good future?
I suppose, again, well, maybe I'm lucky. My background was pretty challenging, a very humble background. My mother was a refugee from Germany. My father's background, very poor family background, but he was a bright guy. But no, he didn't, because his family circle, he needed to work, but he was conscripted into the army and very quickly made major because he was bright. But we still began life. I remember the council house we were brought up in. It was a prefab, I think, in those. It was pretty sad, wonderful community. So I learned that, get some qualifications. I think it was the first one in my family to attend a university, for example. And when you come from those backgrounds, you see both sides of the equation. So when I finally got more comfortable, if that's the right word, I was able to appreciate it much more. And even to give my own children, they were never brought up in extreme comfort. They were brought up comfortably, but even they're both doing very well in their respective musical careers, but they equally have retained that, I think, what's called good citizenship about them. They never take anything for granted. And I think they both accept their privilege to be in the positions they are. And I think if we accept that, we can become humble. Yes, you can be called chief exec. I've been a high sheriff. I'm currently a deputy lieutenant, but it's a privilege to hold that rather than an honor. it is an honour, but you accept that and say, well, there are lots of people that can do so much better a job. I can only do the best I can do, but let's stay humble and keep learning, keep listening, keep curious.
Yeah, I think what I'm getting from you that I really love is that you've had all these titles, finance and CEO and chair and you're not defining yourself by those titles. You're defining yourself by your humanity. Would that be fair to say?
Well, I'm very happy to hear you say that because yes, because what are titles are transient. We're a CEO one day, and when you've left the company, John who the next day, but your humanity is with you all the time. So when we say, well, that's an empathetic person, that person I can relate to and respect. That doesn't go away. Your humanity doesn't go away. You can develop it and acquire it, but titles they go away overnight. So what's the point in clinging on to those? And I know a lot of people I've seen. I think, and this is a real sign, when they actually quit or when they are either forced to quit or retirement comes, and quite often, in the extreme case, they die fairly early because there's no structure to their life. There's nothing they built. They haven't either prepared themselves for that retirement, but I think they have defined themselves through their work and their title and their everything that goes with it, and that can be extremely dangerous for you as an individual to develop. And then if there is going to be a longer life for you, then I think you should start developing those. What can I give back? And again, I think I went into certainly into some of the charities I chose because I ended up, you want your children to be lawyers, accountants, or doctors, and I ended up with two musicians.
Wow.
And it's great, absolutely great. They love what they're doing. They're passionate, and luckily they've been able to make a living from it. But it's a very, very hard world, the arts world, particularly so nowadays. It's very low on the pecking order. And some of the charities I support, they're not the most, shall we say, sexy in terms of attracting funds. So, but that's the challenge, and that's in a way that's the fun side of it.
Amazing. So, what an example you are. I mean, just what an example you are. And our time together today, I mean, I hope we'll have many conversations, but our time together today is coming to an end. So, just in closing, is there like one thing that you want to leave people with, or is there something about where you are and what you're doing? I mean, what would you like? How would you like to leave us? Because this has been a true joy, John.
Well, thank you. I've enjoyed our conversation. I think what you're doing, your whole concept, the concept revolution, resolution, it's what we need so much more of in this life. We could get so many more things done, and it's very frustrating. I could never be a politician. I wouldn't be a good politician. I know that, and I do respect those. I've worked with councillors, and I think, why do they do it? But anyway, thankfully we do have some. No, I think I end up with the things I've learned, and I've said this many times today, probably. I think the secret is never to, again, don't hope that events will turn out the way you want, but welcome events. Welcome them,
Oh,
whichever way they happen. That's the true path to peace.
yeah.
Uh, be open-minded, be curious, never stop learning, and just accept that what you have is a privilege. Use it, and use it where you can help others, and you feel so much better for it.
Thank you. Thank you so much. This has been an absolute joy. Can't wait to talk to you again. Go well, John. Thank you.
Yes, you too, Maria. Thanks a lot.